My hospital sacrificed ideas for ideology. So earlier this year, I quit. What follows is my resignation letter to Nathan Latour Hospital. Enjoy. To Nathan Latour Hospital and my beloved friends and colleagues, I'm writing to you today to resign as a healthcare professional at your facility. I believe I bring a level of professionalism to your workplace that you not only fail to recognize and take for granted, but also make quite impossible to continue to embody so long as I am employed there. Whether working at drug rehab clinics or with the developmentally disabled through NYSARC, over the last decade it has been my privilege to provide patient care to clients. Specialties are critical thinking, ethics, and the Socratic method, and I teach online classes regarding philosophy, as well as streamlining community events with grassroots movements like the Manosphere. But in addition to exploring classic philosophers and traditional texts and literature, I've always invited a wide range of guest lecturers to address my audience, from flat earthers to conspiracy theorists to Christian apologists to atheists to Satanists to Muslims to global climate change skeptics to Occupy Wall Street advocates. If nothing else, I love connecting people and ideas. After all, that's how America was founded to begin with. So in this massively divided political climate, I'm proud of my work and what I have accomplished, especially considering it is work that few others will ever dare to do themselves today. I invited those speakers not because I necessarily agreed with their worldviews, but primarily because I didn't. From those messy and difficult conversations, I've seen the best of what students and citizens can achieve, not running away from the hard questions as they have been told to by their peers and friends and family and many globalist institutions, but rather questioning beliefs while respecting believers, staying even-tempered in challenging circumstances, and even potentially changing their minds and their lives. I never once believed, nor do I now, that the purpose of instruction or my podcasts was to lead any person to a particular conclusion. Rather, I sought to create the conditions for rigorous thought, to help them gain the tools to hunt and furrow for their own conclusions. This is why I became a podcaster to begin with, and also why I love philosophy. But brick by brick, Nathan Latour Hospital has made this kind of intellectual exploration impossible, not only for students, but for their staff. It has transformed a bastion of free inquiry into a social justice factory whose only inputs were race, gender, and victimhood, and whose only outputs were grievance and division. People at this hospital are not being taught to think. Rather, they are being trained to mimic the moral certainty of ideologues. Faculty and administrators have abdicated the hospital's truth-seeking mission and instead drive intolerance and divergent beliefs and opinions. And in my experience there, women were almost always biasly pandered to under any and all circumstances. This has created a culture of offense where students and workers are now afraid to speak openly and honestly about anything. I noticed signs of the liberalism that has now infected and fully swallowed the hospital quite early during my time as a student there through the radiologic technology program. Some of my fellow students and coworkers there followed me online, which led to human resources scrutinizing my lifestyle and personal life. Luckily for me, unlike the hospital, my professors are ethical and decent people, so they just removed me from that site for the good of my own education. But due to this climate of conformity, and despite my own efforts to advocate for my classmates and coworkers to continue engaging in their First Amendment rights, I witnessed other students refusing to engage with different points of view at Nathan Latour Hospital, knowing what could potentially come of it, given how I was dealt with, quote, impartially. Questions from faculty at what they call diversity trainings that challenged approved narratives were instantly dismissed. Those who asked for evidence to justify new institutional policies were accused of microaggressions or intolerance or bigotry. And people like myself were accused of sexism for publishing relevant articles online regarding feminism, masculinity, and gender, written by philosophers and public speakers who are not only male, but female anti-feminists, and respected citizens in society with their own businesses, online networks, and positive rapport they have built with the public over the years. At first, I didn't realize just how systemic this political and social divide was, and I believed I could question this new culture. After all, this is America, and this country was founded in the same manner. So I began asking questions like, what is the evidence that, quote, trigger warnings and emotional safe spaces contribute to student learning in any way? Why should racial consciousness be the lens through which teachers view their role as educators? How did we decide that cultural appropriation is immoral? And mainly, when did we as a society decide that men are no longer important and do not matter, and are not entitled to have their own opinions about women, and women are apparently now to be placated to, under any circumstances, to no longer be held to high standards in workplaces, especially if they are expected and being paid to be mentors for students? Unlike my timid peers and colleagues, I asked these questions out loud and in public and online, which is why I was eventually sabotaged at Nathan Latour Hospital. In my own free time, instead of smoking weed and drinking my life away like everyone else, I decided instead to study the new, quote, values that were consuming this hospital and so many other educational institutions nationwide. Values that sound wonderful and may look good on paper, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, but might actually be just the opposite when applied pragmatically throughout the infrastructures of our daily lives. The more I read the primary source material produced by the critical theorists and PhDs of today, who publish papers on anything from women's studies, feminism, to gender ideology, to critical race theory, the more I suspected that their conclusions reflected the postulates of an ideology, not insights based on empirical evidence. I began networking with student groups who had similar concerns and brought in speakers on my own podcasts to explore these subjects from a critical perspective. And it became increasingly clear to me that the incidents of illiberalism I had witnessed over the years were not just isolated events, but part of an institution-wide problem, and arguably a nationwide problem. The more I spoke out about these issues on social media, the more retaliation I faced from my critics. The more I spoke out against the illiberalism that has swallowed not only healthcare, but universities nationwide, the more retaliation I faced on social media and in person. I deleted my Facebook earlier this year, but it later became known that a former acquaintance of mine and some coworkers were still following me on my YouTube channel, and so they once again complained about me and my podcasts. My accusers, mainly liberal white females, made a slew of baseless accusations against me, which confidentiality rules unfortunately prohibit me from discussing further. What I can share is that friends of mine who were interviewed during the process told me their HR department asked them if they knew anything about me or if I hate women. This slanderous accusation soon became a widespread and disgusting rumor. Although I was no longer a student there, I was still employed at Nathan Latour Hospital. I had originally thought that the childish antics of social media stalking had ended, but clearly I was a fool for believing so. In June of this year, I was eventually pulled in for another HR interrogation, at which point I resigned. Nathan Latour Hospital is union, and with union investigations, there is actually no due process. So I didn't have access to the particular accusations, nor the ability to confront any of my accusers directly, and I had no opportunity to defend myself, so I didn't even bother wasting time on an appeal to the process. From the time I was a student there to my time as an employee there, Nathan Latour Hospital did nothing to stop or address this social media stalking behavior. No one was punished or disciplined for acting in this manner. For me, the months that followed there were marked by continued harassment, and of course I was subjected to more investigation and even accusations of violating what they refer to as human rights. These are very serious accusations that I don't take lightly, and frankly, I don't appreciate being treated like a criminal in my own country, especially not when my own family members have died for this country, ensuring my own freedoms, like the First Amendment rights I proudly exercise while everyone else takes them for granted. So finally, I decided this hospital, like so many other woke institutions today, no longer represented my own best interests in life, but rather favors the agendas of cultural Marxism over truth, honor, and loyalty. And so I just resigned to pursue better prospects. Not only was there no apology for the false accusations against me, or the conflict it caused with my personal life as a result, especially given the recent death of my father and the personal stress that caused me, death in my family that it is worth noting that hospital also was aware of, yet couldn't even be bothered to send me a card. But the HR reps also told me that in the future I would be advised not to render my opinion about, quote, protected classes in such a way that my opinion about protected classes could be known. A bizarre conclusion to absurd charges. It would seem hospitals can enforce ideological conformity just through the threat of these investigations alone, which became more than evident when I was sabotaged for committing no ethical violations to begin with, yet my coworkers remained silent for fear of reprisals to be seen supporting me or my activism. Upon further review, I eventually became convinced that the corrupted bodies of scholarship today in academia were in fact responsible for justifying radical departures from the traditional role of liberal arts schools and basic civility on campuses and clinical healthcare sites. There was an urgent need to demonstrate that morally fashionable papers, no matter how absurd, could be published. I believed then that if I exposed the theoretical flaws of this body of literature, I could help the university community avoid building edifices on such shaky ground and unconvincing theorizing. So this year, I continued to publish more videos that took aim specifically at dissecting gender ideology, its history, which actually goes back thousands of years, and feminism and critical race theory. So, at the very least, people can know the true history of these damaging ideological movements, as their own educational institutions failed to give them an honest accounting. My purpose and the purpose of my colleagues was to show that certain kinds of scholarship are based not on finding truth, but on advancing social grievances. This worldview, held even by those with the highest academic honors in academia today, is not scientific and it is not rigorous. I wish I could say that what I'm describing hasn't taken a personal toll, but it has taken exactly the toll it was intended to: an increasingly intolerable working life and without the protection of tenure. Nathan Latour Hospital actually has a reputation for being a pretty brazen environment to begin with. Before going there, I was told that most people there had pretty thick skin and could handle criticism. So I find it ironic that a talking point like the single mother epidemic, which I frequently discuss on my podcasts, caused so much outrage there for many of the women who viewed it. Then again, I'm not surprised. As I've stated numerous times previously, the collective female psyche in America is now essentially controlled by feminist dogma, which preaches that single motherhood is the highest ideal women should strive for. So the single mother epidemic remains one of the top taboo topics in recent American history, even to the most brave of conservative and Christian commentators and my fellow gonzo journalist friends. And the fact that single topic causes so much outrage for women should be proof alone that it is a feminist agenda which is deliberately being pushed on women by globalists and communist intellectuals in America for nefarious purposes, mainly to normalize the destruction of traditional marriage and the nuclear family unit in America, to the point where anyone who opposes the lifestyles of single mothers is branded a sexist or written off as a reactionary right-wing throwback Neanderthal. I wish I could tell you that these conditions will improve anytime soon, whether in hospitals or other workplaces nationwide. There may be a little hope, as I have been able to have positive conversations with some women over the years who can understand my points of view and have openly told me themselves that even they are tired of being demonized by their female peers and society for being happily married women with conservative values. And they, like myself, do not believe they should be silenced or shamed for voicing those worldviews publicly. But this is the exception rather than the rule, and I've been through enough experiences by now and know the truth about how modern women really are to know the cold reality. If these workplaces could really operate ethically, then it wouldn't always fall to people like my professors to have to go and check in on these people and babysit them to make sure they're behaving themselves like adults, especially when it comes to how they treat their students who are studying under their direction. It's pretty pathetic my professors have to do this, given how busy they already are, and I give them credit for putting up with this total lack of professionalism. They are far better people than I am, because if I had my way, I would just clean house with all these gossiping rubes once and for all. Sadly, there are far too many socio-political conditions which have virtually changed working life in America forever, especially for masculine men like myself who just want to be left alone to believe and live how I choose, and not be blasted by the woke legacy media simply for having preferences on the kind of women I will not tolerate for my own relationships. The days of workplaces being dominated by decent, masculine men are all but over, especially in fields like academia and healthcare. Now, we face the sad reality of having to deal with loveless, divorced women and single mothers, and simping, weak, vindictive, petty beta males. Males who might as well be women in almost every social sphere. These people masquerade as do-gooders when in reality they are the worst of human filth. The Judas Iscariots of our time, who gladly betray their closest friends and Christ for financial profit. It's no secret that Christianity bashing is now normalized in Western culture, but that same dogma they mock and despise perfectly explains why these people live and treat others the way they do. Most of these people have no bedrock religious beliefs, and thus no concepts of honor or loyalty to begin with, and so they will do whatever they can to betray those closest to them, insofar as it advances their own self-interests. Since the onset of the Industrial Revolution, the second and third waves of radical feminism, which has preached entire generations the dogma of a life without men, and the increased cost of living, women have now been pushed out into the workforce to make a living. Even the married women and other single mothers who secretly would have preferred to stay home and raise their children have no other options now. Factor into this the single mother epidemic and the fact that an overwhelming majority of women are now opting to go through life alone without husbands, or else they have a 70% chance of getting divorced. This means that no matter where you go to work in America, you are almost always going to be surrounded by unprofessional women like this, who not only don't know their place, but simply can't mind their own business and do the job they're paid to do. And the, quote, managers who are their superiors certainly aren't going to hold them to any standards either. Because like all beta males, they have no backbone or balls to lead anyone. I have a few close friends who are single mothers. I grew up with them, and they know me well enough to know and respect the fact that I have my own beliefs and opinions regarding the women I refuse to date. However, there are far more single mothers who remain bitter, jaded, and antagonistic towards men and masculinity, which means a guy like me who has already outperformed my male peers academically will always stand out in such work environments. In some aspects, I remain an anomaly as a man, as I have found a way to blend my masculinity with my philosophy. I believe this has caused controversy with me in the past with regards to women, because they are used to the trope of the feminist version of the masculine man. That is, a man who may be physically competent, but is ultimately an imbecile. Whether the football-worshipping, beer-drinking slob who's incompetent with children and can't lead his own family, to the meathead jock brocore who can only think below his fucking waist. In my experience, women much prefer to have men like this in their work environments, as they are ultimately viewed as disposable rubes. As I've stated before, I refuse to apologize for having certain aspects of masculinity blended into my character. So whenever there is a man like me who is not only physically competent, but intellectually competent, they view that as a threat on subconscious level, for whatever reason. And this is once again a condition of working life in America, which is unlikely to ever change anytime soon. Statistically speaking, men typically do worse in school than women, which is why men like me are rare, and many of these fields are now oversaturated with women, as opposed to there being an equal balance of men and women. Many people may tune into my podcasts and think that this is just me ranting. Well, it's not. This isn't actually about me. This is about the kind of institutions we want in the future and the values we choose. It is about what we are going to continue to tolerate in America and what we refuse to tolerate. Every idea that has advanced human freedom has always, and without fail, been initially condemned. So it is to be expected that people like myself will always be branded outcasts, irrespective of the validity of any claims brought forward to slander and defame our moral character. As individuals, we often seem incapable of remembering this lesson, but that is exactly what our institutions are for, to remind us that the freedom to question is our fundamental right. Educational institutions should remind us that that right is also our duty. And when I say us, I really mean you, because I am not guilty of not upholding that duty. And I would argue that I have taken risks that few will ever attempt themselves while advancing that duty. I had the privilege of mentors like my beloved Latin teacher, Charles A. Giglio, one of the most inspiring men I've ever met in my life. He was a true educator, advocate, and mentor, and no doubt contributed to making me the man I am today. I understand that many of you lacked positive, masculine mentors like this, which would explain why the majority of you lack my particular brand of activism. But that is no excuse for your continued moral and spiritual cowardice, and your consistent refusal to speak the truth in this clearly dying culture which lacks values. In fact, it is your own complacency and total apathy to public affairs, which is why you remain cowards, and why, today, I have only a few people in my life I can actually trust and rely on. The words of Shakespeare, "Woe to all those who rely on you for favors. Where he should find you lions, find you instead rabbits." The Hippocratic Oath is a well-known Greek medical text that requires new physicians to swear to uphold ethical standards. But, like most aspirational ideals, they just become lost in the ether. They become words that mean nothing to people anymore because no one believes in them or actually works to further them, which is why I have come to call it the hypocritical oath. Some of these ethical standards include avoid corruption, be honest, be non-judgmental, and improve care of clients. By engaging in this anti-American behavior of monitoring social media accounts in an attempt to silence free speech in this country, Nathan Latour Hospital has failed in fulfilling this duty. If not to the general public, then to the students who study under their practice, and furthermore, dishonoring the very nation they operate business in. It would seem that the personal lives of employees and students are always held up to scrutiny and criticism, as opposed to the quality of care they provide to their patients. And in doing so, it has failed not only its students, but the public that supports it. Regarding any future complaints brought against me, my podcasts, and intellectual property, I state this. I consider it a great dishonor to have to deny that I am a criminal, whether to Nathan Latour Hospital, who placated to the whims of spoiled brats and gossips like Brock Bellinger and Maya Rivera, people who don't even know me, have no active role in my life or activism whatsoever, yet who felt they had the right to question my honor, all because of personal differences they have with me philosophically. I am a respected member of my communities and have served my country faithfully and have done far more than the average citizen can say for themselves in advancing First Amendment rights in this country. I challenge anyone to produce any witness against me, and if they do not, I hope they will at least have the decency to be reminded of the United States Constitution and to clear my name with the same publicity with which they have now besmirched it. While I am grateful for the opportunity to have served patients for over a decade, it has become clear to me that this institution is no place for people who intend to think freely and explore ideas in peace without threats or intimidation tactics. This is not the outcome I wanted, but I feel morally obligated to make this choice and also warn others about this hospital before they apply there. For 10 years, I have spoke of the importance of living by your principles. One of mine is to defend our system of liberal education from those who seek to destroy it. And my core principle is to do whatever I have to avoid indoctrination, perpetuated by indifferent people who are dead inside and believe in nothing. And if that means resigning from any employer, then so be it. After all, who would I be if I didn't? Sincerely yours in rebellion.